Jack, thank you for the introduction. I will. If you could park yourself there. Right. As Jack said, the book is out now. The book I only got a copy of it this morning, so it's fresh off the press, and they'll be on sale outside, under the stairs, for £25. It will save £5 if you buy it today. So I hope loads of you will buy a copy. The whole purpose of it, I'm plugging the book. Thank you very much for indulging me for that moment. I think the main component of the book is about urban farming. It's about cultivating this new generation of eco-warriors. And the word smart city has always been controversial. What do you mean by that? I've been asked many, many times. Smart city is a vision, it's a manifesto and a provocation for all of us to sit up and think about what our environment should be in the future. The smart city proposes cultivation of land into the urban context, and it wants to establish an ecological symbiotic relationship between nature and the built form. Why? This is the reason why. If you look at these statistics, and also what I've got here is that I'm going to chuck these things at you now. This is from Egypt. This is from Kenya. This is from Mexico. More from Mexico. And this is from Guatemala. And Gran Canaries. And this is from Ethiopia. All the food that we get from our local supermarkets are from far, far away. Just imagine the food miles on this, all the food. And this is a problem. This is one of the reasons, the central component that we should really bring farming back into our cities. There are many, many other benefits, from social to environmental, and I think that's something that we need to consider. And we need to consider it as builders, but all of us need to consider that. I think the hybridization into the city would actually be amazing. It would reduce the carbon footprint of the food that we have, as I've said earlier on. We can actually see our city morph in front of our eyes. For example, one of the examples of my case study in the book is almost superimposing this image of farmland into a very dense Chinese city in South China. So into this park. So rather than the park just having a bit of grass, a few trees, rose bushes, daffodils, no, what you have is that you have farming inside the park itself. The park will start to serve the community. It doesn't have to be horizontal. The intervention could be vertical. It could be stacked, like this one in South Korea that we propose, an urban square that actually has layers of agriculture. Part of this will cultivate the community, will bring all of us to understand our neighbors, to actually allow us to communicate through a common factor of food production. It doesn't matter if we are from one minority to another, or from a different race, from different culture. We can all talk food. I mean, that's something we all have in common. The other thing is also that, as I said earlier on, it's something that we can all do. It's not my responsibility as an architect or your responsibility as a planner to do these things, or if you work for the government agencies. Everybody could participate in it, including my mother, and she's not an architect. The other thing is that it's also, the employment figures have been very high, and one of the things that would be amazing is that those who are on the dole could really participate in this too. So we don't just sit and watch Oprah if we're on the dole queue. We actually could activate ourselves and do something useful. I think that statement might not go down very well. The other thing is that I think cultivating community is very important. This was a piece of land just by Lake Michigan. It was a project proposal we did where the land was contaminated by chemical plants around it. So we proposed a landscape, a allotment system that floats above the island, and during the daytime, the allotments could be disposed into the lake itself. So reconfiguring the landscape from day to night. The other thing is, which is also very important, is that we have to bring back a very efficient symbiotic system back into our cities. We can't just take and expect everything to be brought in and left on our plate. We really have to think about how we can recycle and reutilize the entire system. This is one where a project that has been talked about a lot. It's Guangzhou Smart City. It's about the hybridization of agriculture and urbanity and housing. Isn't that beautiful? That is a fantastic image, I think. And the scale of it is about 2.5 times of Hyde Park. So you can just imagine how big this is and how much food it could provide for any city. These are early study models of it. Sorry about this. Is it possible to dim the light down a little bit? Or not? Thank you. That's fine. And if you look at those, what I call mounds, the towers and craters, they actually are sandwich layers between agricultural land and housing. And on the green border, as you can see, there's a natural filter for pollution. This is set in an industrial area in South China. So the pollution level, as you all know, as you have all observed on your TV over the Beijing Olympic weeks, is that pollution level is very high in China, especially south. The augmentation of the landscape is made using recycled rubbish. Rubbish, actually, a lot of them comes from Europe. That's the tragedy of it. These are locations of all the planting area, which actually coincides precisely with housing. The ancillary spaces would be for livestock. A vision of a smart city. And on the top of one of what I call the hills, you would have the reservoir that acts as the market, the social space, and also the hub of each community. Lychee trees, a fruit tree that would be used to filter pollution. I'm running through this rather quickly in the hope that you would actually be curious enough to look into my book. I have a purpose, a mission this afternoon. So this is also looking at the relationship between housing and the ownership of farmland. So if you are a white-collar worker, you probably wouldn't want to be farming every day, but you can actually have a symbiotic relationship with your neighbor who happens to be a farmer, or his family who are in farming. The other paraphernalia within the city of water holes to smaller reservoirs, anaerobic digesters, heating and cooling system. This is a cooling system where, imagine it's in South China, it's subtropical, it's very hot. Hot air is sucked into the concrete labyrinth and then pumped out into the apartments. So hence reducing the usage of hundreds of air conditioning units. A similar project in Nordhavn in Denmark. It's the regeneration of the docks. We laid a carpet of farming and then inserted points of housing over it. Adam and Eve didn't have to go far for their food. Why should we? Why can't we have the freshest thing possible? Why can't we actually support local farming? Why do we actually have to support giant supermarket companies that actually have to bring food from long, long distance away? Processing, storage of food takes up 80% of energy. And if you have any community, you actually have to provide food. This is another instance in South Korea where all the red lines indicate a housing development, and in the center of it is a park. Like the scheme in China, we propose that instead of wiping this piece of wonderful farmland away, the programmatic requirement of the park is inserted over the top of it, hovering it, but still retaining the farmland below. As you can see, these long piers are grass for recreational activities, and the farmlands are retained with these circular white and pink patches being orchards for peach and pear, which are the local fruits. That would be the kind of texture we were looking for in the design. The relation between grass for recreation and fruit trees and also farmland. The preservation of heritage. As you can see, those are the piers that floats and hovers over the farmland. I think if one were to expand the common received notion of wealth to include fresh air, green space, nutrition, I think this is what the smart city should be. And this is what actually the wealth of our community should be. This is the kind of vision of what would happen, how it would change, and how it would actually change the beauty of our cities. There are a few examples I'm going to show you. One is that we can actually occupy the embankments, for example. This is the embankment of the Pearl River in China. And generally, on this edge, there'll be just heaps of rubbish. And what we have proposed is that because it's not used, the reason why it's not used is because it floods probably every 3 months. And this land is not usable. And what happens is that all the rubbish will get sort of stagnate on the edge. And here we propose that this edge, and the entire edge of the Pearl Delta, should be farmed. And like in Egypt, on the Nile, the flooding would actually naturally fertilize the land. So this is when it's low tide and high tide. Other aesthetics that would appear in our city would be this one here, where you get these sort of hubs of where you can actually have community activities, reusing renewable energies. Or, again, the idea of the layered park, the park that actually is green, but the sides of it will be cladded with solar cells. Solar cells become part of a construction element. Or you have large, what we call these sort of gray blotches there, environmental trellis, where you could actually plant and also have high-tech elements like solar panels and solar cells to harvest renewable energy, to provide energy, i.e. food, to the communities. Other proposals and other scenes that you will see in the future, hopefully, would be that we can actually reuse or utilize temporary usage in a way of forgotten sites, sites that are now piled with rubbish, overgrown with wild grass, or completely abandoned. This is a map of Newark, which is actually a pretty rundown city. And there are lots of gaps within that have been sort of introduced the idea of urban farming. And this is one that we expanded. And this is an image of what it is now. It's run by the Brick City Urban Farm group. And it's actually, they're starting this initiative by actually having short leases on these pieces of forgotten sites. This is a scene on the rooftop of a corporate building by the Hudson in New York. Or a prime piece of land next to the ugliest building in the world in Taipei, Taipei 101. My apologies to people from Taiwan. It's just that it's a personal taste. I really hate that building. And those who know me, I always state my point, and I make my position clear. But what is wonderful against this very ugly piece of structure is this huge, huge piece of green urban farming community all coming out of the apartments and working the land and planting these wonderful vegetables there. And I find that juxtaposition of these sort of commercial, very expensive plots against vegetables, which probably doesn't cost anywhere near the value of the tower, coexists. And I think this sort of relationship should be encouraged. I think you guys are great. This is one of my favorite images. I think I'm going to take questions after this, but the thing is, this is my last image. And this image basically sums up a lot of my book. And this talks about the empowerment of farming communities, empowering us to control how and what and how much we pay for our food. It empowers us to really make sure that our environment is suitable for generations to come. It also tells us that we do not have to separate technology from something very traditional like farming. And we can actually coexist very well in terms of how we produce food and how we advance with science and technology and how we shape our future cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CJ, for a fantastic talk, and I'm sure also thank you for some free and sustainable food some people got there. We've got some time for questions. I'll put on for a question if you could wait for either myself or for Carly to bring me a microphone so that we can all hear you. Straight down the front.
Excuse me eating during your talk. Why do you use round structures in all your designs rather than square structures? Because agriculture obviously is more efficient if it's done in square plots where you can run in straight lines along it to do the weeding and do all of those other things. But you've used round structures in your design.
Yes, I think the round structures initially came from the round courtyard housing in China. The other thing is that if you look at this satellite picture here, this is how irrigation is done. This is a NASA, I didn't take it myself, I wish I did. This is a NASA copyright image. And that's how they are done. So that was the inspiration behind a lot of the shapes.
There, another question?
Hello. Thanks very much for those fantastic subject matter. Very important. Just wanted to ask you whether you felt that it would be possible to set up situations through policy, presumably, that what you're talking about could be self-generating rather than planned and implemented on a large scale.
I think it could definitely be self-generating, like the scheme that started in Newark by the Brick City Urban Group. They actually started as a very small enterprise. Community people just comes up, they gathered together, they bought these sort of earth boxes and just had short negotiation with landlords by using their land for a short time. And then they expanded, and then they actually encouraged school groups, rehab groups, drug rehab communities to come and join them. So it's expanding, but it doesn't have the kind of, it's still in a sort of cottage industry state. I actually think that the state needs to also give a lending hand, to this. We can't just all do it by the bottom up. I believe that we can all participate in it, but I think the government and environmental agencies should really help in setting a more ambitious framework for a lot of this to exist in a much more structured way rather than haphazard way.
So you can provide a framework which then allows that.
Absolutely. So the things that the master planning proposals that I've done so far is literally to actually introduce a framework for things to grow and evolve and change, because the things that a lot of these things are very much determined on the local culture, the participation of local communities and so forth. So, and also government support, because in China, for example, farming is seen to be a very low profession, and it's a problem. And I think if the culture and the perception of farming is not changed in China, they will seriously have a big food shortage problem. North Korea already, about a month ago, there was a big report on BBC that there is food shortage. Because the things that a lot of people do not want to do farming in these sort of countries. They want to go into the cities. They think that places like Shanghai and Beijing and Guangzhou, they're all paved with gold, which is not true at all. But they actually go into the cities and they want to abandon what is really great about them. When we were there, we talked to the local communities. And what was really sad about it was that they actually talked about their aspiration was to live on the 95th floor, air-conditioned unit with modern utilities. And I say, I want to live in your beautiful farmhouse surrounded by green pastures and animals. That's where I come from. I come from a very small village in Malaysia. So the things that maybe I'm yearning for my childhood days. But it's not a romantic notion. It's a possible notion that if you give a very strategic framework and support, the initial support, it would happen.
Thank you. I think Carly's got a question.
Hi, I like the general idea very much, but do you think it's applicable all year round in different climates?
I think it's applicable. The idea of the smart city. Sorry, the idea of.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I think this has to be investigated in different climatic conditions. So far, we talked about, we have actually done research and worked with government agencies in China, in Korea, in Denmark. We really haven't tested it out in the UK, for example. So I would say yes and no. Like all farming, it's seasonal. You cannot actually have it all year round. And also, you need to be very careful about crop circulation, and you need to really think about how the whole organic system works. You can't just plant and plant and plant, because otherwise the soil will no longer be fertile. So I think there needs to be a lot of work done to this idea. But I think, as I said, smart city is not so much that it's a thing that you can implement tomorrow. It's something that I'm hoping, and my research team is hoping, that would provoke all of you and go back and think and say, yeah, actually, it's not so bad, but we can all be part of this movement. And I think that would be something quite exciting. I mean, for us to come this far, to have this sort of conversation, and to have all of you here, which I'm very honored by, is a big move. If I gave this lecture 10 years ago, probably 3 people will turn out. So I think we are getting closer. And as I said, this is not a utopian idea. It's not saying that it could be done, in totality. I would like it to have an overall vision, but the key thing is that it needs to be implemented with everybody involved. It needs to be implemented from small components, because utopian ideas fail in the past. All of them fail because they wanted this overall, overarching thing, which was just probably too much, and too much of an investment, like the one, there are other schemes in China, which I shouldn't, because this is streamed live, I should not actually name the other schemes. There's a scheme near Shanghai that some of us would know, that was so utopian that the investment was phenomenal. I think there was one, yeah. We'll come to you in a minute.
Hello, sorry. I wonder, you haven't mentioned livestock. I think that's a problem. Because in London, in 150 years ago, the backyard, people kept cows, fresh milk, no LMRs, no road line. So I'd like to ask you about livestock. The other thing was, I expect you've seen the plans for the American embassy in Battersea, which is originally. Do you think you could perhaps give a talk to the US State Department and say, here is a wonderful thing, we've got wonderful watery landscape, rice, paddy fields, I don't know if the climate's right, but what an opportunity for them to take up the green court.
Yes. I did sort of mention livestock in passing because the ancillary spaces between the circular housing community, they're all for livestock. I think livestock is very important because the manure from the cows and chickens, they are all part of this system that would be recycled back into organic farming. It's absolutely crucial. And part of the mission was also to preserve the livestock that already exists in, for example, in the Guangzhou scheme, because in the area now they produce all the dairy products for South China and Hong Kong. So yes, I just skimmed through it. I don't think I have the authority to talk to the American government about their awful scheme. I actually I saw it yesterday. I thought the scheme looked very prickly in more ways than one. I think they should have commissioned one of my graduate students, my postgraduate students, who is doing this wonderful building, which is the new American embassy. An American embassy that is open, not neurotic, which is engaging with food production. Isn't it wild boar? Yeah. And apples and ciders production? Okay. So I think they should have employed you to do the project. But anyway, who am I to criticize the American government and their choice of scheme? So anyway. Yeah, that one.
Hello. I was wondering if, as a means to try to implement your vision, you would support a revenue-neutral carbon tax, essentially like taxing carbon, and all the money that you raise, you can rebate to people. So people's overall income stays about the same. The relative price of carbon-intensive products that are shipped from overseas goes dramatically up. And they're very much incentivized to actually take place in this local produce and everything.
I think the carbon issue is a big one. I personally do not believe that it's achievable to have zero carbon. And I think if we can reduce the carbon on the food miles, that would be great. The deal to have a rebate on carbon would be an interesting one because to start off with, if you have low carbon footprint or smaller carbon footprint in the household, for example, you really need to invest in insulation. You need to invest in the kind of equipment. You need to invest in a lot of things. And I think this is really a very complex process that each government needs to get engaged with the government energy agencies and talk to. And in a way, if we were to buy local rather than the products that I've just slung out to all of you, maybe we should also have a tax rebate on if we were to buy local. But that will encourage local jobs too. And I think that the relationships from jobs to community accessibility, lower carbon footprint, it's a very complex one. And I really think this is what I'm suggesting is only the initial conversation, which I hope my research will engage further with other disciplines.
I think we have a question up front.
Okay.
CJ, I have two interrelated questions. How much of the food requirements of the city, of the smart city, do you see envisaged being produced locally? Even if it was 10%, it would already be a huge achievement.
Yes.
How do you see the ratio between density of population and agriculture, in the sense that although they're cohabiting in a friendly way, they're competing for space? And the other question is related to that. Most of your images show fairly traditional farming methods, and I think visually and poetically it comes across very strongly. But would this increase in food production per city require technologies such as hydroponics and other contemporary?
I think that the questions are very much linked. I do not see that, I agree with you. If we can achieve 10% or even less than that, that would be a success, because there's no way we can have enough surfaces to plant to provide for London, for example. There are examples of victory farms in America, in London. They used to plant potatoes in Hyde Park during the war. Even outside the Reichstag during the war, they planted. It was just the field. Have you been to Berlin outside the Reichstag? It's used to be planted completely during the war. But that's only enough to feed a small percentage. I actually think that the methods of producing food, for example, I think that could also be more scientific. But on the other hand, food production in sort of what I'm suggesting is not just about producing food. It's also about cultivating community engagement. And I think I'm also keen to engage as many people as possible, rather than going extremely high-tech, as some other people have suggested. Because the things that would actually cut out the cultivating the community. And I think cultivating the community is equally as important as lowering the carbon footprint. I think nowadays, I live in a building that I have never actually met my neighbor. That is very sad. And I think one of the key things is really to get greater community neighborly engagement. I think we'll take one more question. Yeah.
Hello, I think your idea is very interesting, and it will be very useful to combine with park design or maybe some abandoned lands. It can be regarded as a short-term strategy. But my question is that in the city, the urban land is limited resource, so people, they usually use this kind of land, vacant land, for commercial office. So I think that farming is the last choice. So what's your strategy of this kind of urban farming in the city?
I think it's not my choice, it's all our choices. If we think, did you go, I don't know, did anybody go and see this installation in Dalston by the artist Agnes Dennis? It was a remake of a piece that she did in New York about 20 years ago. And she planted wheat in Battery Park. And the harvest the harvest were only valued at $20-something. Whereas the plot of land, if she were to build a commercial block on there, was more than 25 billion or million or whatever zillions that you could get. So the thing is that the installation was very much about, it's a question mark. What our values, what my value, what your value is. If you value the whole notion of wealth in terms of monetary terms, bank accounts, then yes, of course, build buildings, let it out. But if wealth, as I said early on, is about fresh air, nutrition, and a sort of healthier community, I would say that it's the latter. Because the things that, at the end of the day, something has to give. And we all have to take a position on it. I'm not a politician. I can't sell you the idea. I think all of you need to go home today and think about it, and think about what you support, what you don't support. We all have a responsibility to take a position. And it applies to planners as well, and architects, and anybody else who is not in those professions. You all have a choice. You have a voice, which is very powerful. You can actually make things happen. I think on that point, maybe I should end. I just want to thank everybody very, very much for your lunchtime. You know, you could be having a wonderful lunch instead of listening to me drone on. Thank you very much.